Hello everybody. In this video I want to look at the fall and its effects. Please read, first of all, the chapter of Genesis 3 before you engage in the questions in this video, especially the first one regarding the serpent there. So you should have noticed now the serpent, it's described, was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. So interestingly, the serpent is nowhere identified as Satan in this passage or in the rest of the Old Testament. That's a connection the New Testament does make. Satan, serpent, same thing. But the origin of evil in God's good creation, where did evil come from? Why is this serpent tempting Adam and Eve in the midst of this good creation, what God calls good over and over? That's a bit of a mystery, and we can explore that more together if you have some questions. So, reading Genesis 3, I want to have us focus for a minute on what the first sin could really be described as. So here's my way of kind of summing it up. By disobeying God, Adam and Eve showed pride. They wanted to decide for themselves, and we still do this today as their descendants. What right and wrong is. So we want to make that choice for ourselves. We want to decide what's good and what's evil apart from God. And so I want to examine the effects of that choice in three different ways. The effect of the fall on our relationship with God, with each other, other human beings, and our relationship with the rest of creation. So first, our relationship with God. Adam and Eve are now exiled. Remember that word, because it's a pretty important one later in the Old Testament too. They're exiled, I think, is an appropriate word. They're banished, they're separated from the Garden of Eden, and thus from God's presence. And a way to think about this is they experience, as a result, spiritual death. Now, some people ask, do they spiritually and physically die? Is physically dying part of their punishment here? Well, let's explore that a little bit. So we read about two trees that are actually named in the midst of the garden. The tree of life, and even though it's cut off there by the Lego brick picture, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, though, here that they are commanded not to eat, with the punishment being, in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. What does God mean by die, though? Well, let's look at this. In Genesis 5, we read that Adam actually lived, remember this is after his fall into sin, 930 years. So clearly Adam does not, physically at least, die immediately after eating the fruit. He does, though, in a sense, like we just mentioned, spiritually die. He is cut off from the presence of God himself, banished, exiled along with Eve from the garden. And it's interesting then that in this state of spiritually being dead in their sin, God says this: the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever, because to the dust he is going to return. So, very interesting that the tree of life, it had been mentioned before this, but we never read, did Adam and Eve eat from that tree before they sinned? Were they eating from that in the garden, since there was no command not to before the fall? Maybe. But whatever the case, after the fall, after they disobey the command not to eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they are now commanded to not eat from the tree of life as well. They are barred and cut off from being able to do that in their sinful state. So here's the big question. Were humans originally immortal? That is, did God create us originally to always automatically live forever? Or was this a possible gift of God that Adam and Eve and humanity, all of us, could have had, but we lost? So for some other clues, maybe, I think Genesis 3 does kind of point in a certain direction, but for some other clues here too, Job 7 verse 9. So this is another book in the Old Testament. Just as a cloud dissipates and vanishes, those who go down to Sheol, more on what that is in a minute, will not come back. So there's my vanishing cloud there. Ecclesiastes, a couple of books later, chapter 9, verses 3 through 5. It is the same for all, the author says. As the good one is, so is the sinner. The dead know nothing. The memory of them is forgotten. So here's the idea here. Sheol, that word in Job. That is in Hebrew. That should just say Hebrew, not Hebrew. Sorry about that. Sheol in Hebrew, Hades in Greek. Both of those words mean the same thing. The underworld or the realm of all the dead. That's where Israelites in the Old Testament, that's where they thought people went when they died. Everybody, righteous, evil, good, bad. There's no talk, interestingly, of heaven and hell as opposite destinations. No, it's just Sheol for everybody. Even the idea of the resurrection of the body in the end times, that doesn't come up until the prophets. So that does emerge later in the Old Testament. But for the most part, the idea is you go to Sheol, you die, and that's it. So speaking of Hades here, the Greek word for Sheol, maybe some of you know your Greek mythology or you just know your Disney movies. So here's Hercules and Hades, the personification, the symbolic god of the dead. And here's all the people that have died in the underworld that he rules over here. Good, bad, doesn't matter. They all go to Sheol. And here's a picture of what that might look like for the Israelites. We'll talk more about this in class, but the underworld, you die, you go under the world, literally under the earth, and you don't come back. So my question again, were humans originally immortal? Or was this a potential gift that we could have had but lost? It definitely seems like more of this second option, based on Adam and Eve not being allowed to eat from the tree of life, whether they had done so before and can't now, or whether they had never done it but now may not ever do it a single time because of their sin. Why would that tree of life be there if Adam and Eve were automatically going to live forever? So that kind of clues us in, and those passages about Sheol from Job and Ecclesiastes clue us into more likely this option. It was potential. We could have lived forever, but chose to disobey God, and that possibility was taken away. So, just to continue this train of thought just a moment further, the Egyptians, maybe some of you know this about Egypt, ancient Egypt, very elaborate belief in the afterlife. So you die, here's a pharaoh that is mummified, and he's going to live forever, depending on his works in this life. Welcomed into the presence of the gods to live forever. That was their belief. Mesopotamia, though, here's an example from the Epic of Gilgamesh, very famous piece of ancient literature from Mesopotamia. You, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, be merry day and night, dance, play, spend time with the little one, your children, your spouse, because basically this is saying you're not going to live forever. You're going to die, and that's going to be it. And kind of intriguingly, Ecclesiastes, back to Ecclesiastes, uses a lot of the same imagery. Enjoy your bread, the wife that you love, because that is your portion in life. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. You're going to die, and that will be the end. So, taking a look at this map, here's Egypt, empire to the west, Mesopotamia, the empires to the east. Here's Canaan, where the Israelites are, right in the middle. And so think about this question now in light of what we just saw. Second effect, then, the human relationship with each other. We looked at our relationship with God being in spiritual death now, exiled from God because of our sin. Adam and Eve start to blame each other. Their relationship with each other breaks down. So Adam says, the woman made me do it. And Eve says, the serpent made me do it. Neither of them want to take responsibility for their own sin. And that's definitely the case for us today, I think, too. Whether as individuals or as groups, we have pride in ourselves to the extent that we don't want to admit when we're wrong, and we'd rather blame and belittle other groups of people than do that to ourselves. So this is where racism comes from, and many other things as well. Socially, our relationships with each other break down. And then finally, our relationship with creation. We were supposed to work and take care of it as God's image bearers, and now, as we continue to do so, there's going to be thorns. There's going to be thistles. Life is going to be hard. There's going to be difficulty and pain in childbirth for women as well, we read. And yet, to wrap up, God still shows us grace in the midst of the fall. He gives clothes to Adam and Eve, and then more powerfully, he promises deliverance. He, and Christians throughout the years have interpreted this as Jesus is going to crush the serpent's head, and the serpent is just going to strike his heel. So as we wrap this up, and move into the effects of the fall and the flood, keep that promise in mind.